Welcome, everybody, to the CFO Roundtable discussion on building a culture of budget accountability. We're very excited about this event. We've got over 150 people registered today. My name's Larry Servin. I'm one of the co-founders of Accelerant. A couple of housekeeping points. We'll be collecting questions during this webinar. There's a question panel in your GoToMeeting dialog box, and you can just type your question in there. Then at the end of the formal discussion, the panelists will address your questions. Now, we're also going to be running some interactive polling questions during the webinar, which are going to pop up on your screen when the time comes. Now, this event is actually part of a webinar series that we began last October on improving budgeting and planning, and we've actually recorded the prior 5 webinar sessions, and you can view them anytime by visiting our website, www.accelerant.com. Accelerant.com. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ted Dacko, Accelerant's Executive Chairman. Ted?
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it. And a couple of housekeeping issues from me. First of all, I am conducting this webinar from the Detroit airport, so I apologize for any background noise. I'm going to try to limit that, or any technical difficulties that we might have because of that. Second thing is that this is not a commercial for Accelerant, although we have a dilemma here in that the 3 distinguished panelists today are all Accelerant customers. So we are going to beg your forgiveness if there are examples used about the company. This is about creating a culture of budget accountability. But as I just said, we have the situation where all 3 of the panelists are customers of ours. So we'll try to make sure that we're not blatant about the commercial. So what I would like to do is I would like to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to ask them to say a little bit about themselves. So as you see on the screen, we're going to start with Howard Buxbaum, who is the Vice President of Finance for Drew University. We also have Jill Larsen, who is the Chief Financial Officer for the Baptist General Convention of Texas. And we have Linda Roth, who's the Chief Financial Officer for Long-Term Care Partners, a division of John Hancock. So in reverse order from that, Linda, if I could just ask you to take a minute and introduce yourself and your organization to the folks on the line.
Hi, sure, Ted. My name is Linda Roth, and as Ted said, I'm the CFO of Long-Term Care Partners. We're a third-party administrator. Our primary customer is the federal government, the Office of Personnel Management. We administer the federal long-term care insurance program across the federal employee population, and we also administer the federal vision and dental program by administering. We collect premium and we send the premium to the carriers. We also administer an enrollment website for the vision and dental program, and the federal government is our only client. We've been in operation since 2001, and we're owned 100% by John Hancock Life and Health Insurance.
Thank you, Linda. Jill, would you take a minute and say something about yourself and your organization?
Sure. I'm Jill Larsen, Treasurer and CFO of Baptist General Convention of Texas. We're the state convention for Baptist churches in Texas. We relate to about 5,600 churches. That means we help them with various ministries throughout the state and around the world. We have 270 employees. Those are mostly here in Dallas, but also housed around the state. We were actually formed in 1886, so have been relating to our churches for 125 years now.
Thank you. Howard?
Thanks, Ted. I'm Howard Buxbaum, and I'm Vice President for Finance and Business Affairs at Drew University, which is located in Madison, a suburb of New York City, and we have a budget of about $85 million, about 500 employees, and about 2,500 students, and we've been in business since 1867.
All right, so each of you are senior financial executives in your organizations, and they are very wildly different organizations in terms of what they do. I'm going to ask each of you the same question. Do you have a general philosophy about how you conduct your departments? Howard, do you have a philosophy?
Well, I think the philosophy that we have in what I call the finance office is really collaborative engagement with the various parts of the university. We have 3 large academic units and the myriad number of support units. So we try to be proactive in engaging with the units to make sure that they're operating with sound financial principles. They're linking into our overall financial strategy. They have the tools they need, and we're supporting them in what we do. We view ourselves as a support service in terms of a larger academic mission.
Thank you. Linda?
I would have to say that I share Howard's philosophy. We have a staff in our finance department of about 11 people, and who serve the departments. We have about 30 different departments within our organization of about 300 employees. We have over the years developed very good working relationships with the managers and directors of the departments and try to assist them when it comes to the budget process and understanding financial results. We also view ourselves as a service organization, and we try to make the manager's job as easy as possible.
Jill, tell me about your philosophy at the Baptist General Convention of Texas.
Well, our organization is a little bit unique because most of our budget managers have very little financial background or experience. So our basic philosophy is to keep things simple for them. We have to be absolutely above reproach in how we use the funds that the churches send us. So accountability is very important to us. But for our managers, we really try to make our processes as simple as we can so that they can focus on ministry and not just managing budget.
Okay, and Linda, I'm going to go back to you. I'm actually going to ask all of you this question. Tell me what a culture of budget accountability means to you and why it was important for your organization to try to achieve that. So Linda, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, we have the federal government as our client, and our contracts are under the federal acquisition regulations. So it's important for us to really keep on top of our budget and understand what we're spending and what we're spending in terms of amount and what we're spending it on, because there's a number of things that aren't allowed with respect to expenses in the contracts that we have with the federal government. And so it's important to educate, for me to educate the managers with respect to what's an allowed expense and what isn't an allowed expense. We're subject to audit by the not only our external auditors, but also the Office of the Inspector General at the Office of Personnel Management on an annual basis. And we are held to a budget guarantee that, you know, if we spend more than what we had planned for our budget, the contract will not provide for that. So it's very important that all the managers and directors are aware of what we're spending and what the budget is month to month during the fiscal year.
Okay, Joel, I'm going to go back to you. What's the budget accountability mean to you, and why is it important for you to achieve?
Well, as I mentioned before, we feel like we have to be above reproach. Because our organization is fairly large and complex, especially for a nonprofit, it's important for each of our managers to fully understand and own, so to speak, their budget, so that in total we have good accountability. Historically, that has been a challenge because of our budget process. So we have worked diligently to try to have them feel like they understand every component of their budget, and so we've tried to do our best to equip them so that they understand it and know how to use the tools to achieve that.
Howard, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, because you've told me that Drew had to adopt to a new normal for colleges and universities. So what does that mean, and how does it relate to budget accountability?
Well, I think that's a good question, Ted. For us, having at least two important economic factors in the last couple of years. One is that students coming to particularly private universities need more financial aid because of the changed economic circumstances, and also because the university partially relies on its endowment for operations, and that endowment has dropped somewhat to the market declines over the last several years. Obviously, they've rebounded to some extent. So for us, the situation is that we're looking for ways to make every dollar count. In other words, looking under every rock and stone to make sure we're operating efficiently and we're using the money in support of the mission. So we're very honed in on that issue and having accountability, and I think coupled with efficiencies, so that with I don't want to say we have less dollars, but it's sort of like the federal government. We have costs go up, so we sort of have a tightness in the budget because our income was not going up as much as our expenses were. So we've had to bridge that gap, and part of the strategy is more accountability to make sure we're using dollars effectively and efficiently, and we're not having any leakage where things happen outside of budget parameters and we have additional spending. So, our attention to accountability is only heightened given the current environment.
Well, what I'm hearing, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, what I'm hearing from all of you is that accountability means for your end users greater participation in and ownership of the numbers. Did I get that relatively right?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Okay. So let's do a poll. Let's ask the audience members how important is creating a culture of accountability in their organization. So let's run that poll, and Larry, go ahead.
Okay. So what you should see on your screen now is a poll with a pretty straightforward question: how important is creating a culture of budget accountability in your organization? Very important, important, somewhat important, not a priority, and not important at all. So we'll give this just maybe a little bit under a minute to run. I think most people sort of have an instinctual reaction to this, and it looks like the vast majority said either very important or important, but a good 72% said very important. Ted, is that what you were expecting, or something different?
Well, the 6% of you who don't think it's a priority or is not important at all, you're probably on the wrong webinar. But yeah, what do you folks, what do you panelists think about that? Is there any surprise there?
No, I think not at all. I think that organizations, I think for some time now, have argued that their programmatic success is related to accountability, which I think is really financial and non-financial. In other words, we want to make sure that people are accountable for the dollars, and they're also accountable for the goals or mission of the organization. I think high-performance organizations are ones where people are accountable and to some extent rewarded for that. So I don't think you can be successful in today's world. So I actually not surprised at all, and in fact gratified.
Okay, Linda, any comments in addition to that?
It doesn't surprise me at all for this result either. I think that in the very active budgeting, it implies a certain accountability, and in today's environment where the costs of operations are increasing, I think it becomes more and more important, not only in the environment that my company works in, but in all business environments, that the accountability for the budget and for business processes in general are extremely important.
Okay, Jill, anything to add?
No, I just would say I think all organizations face limited resources, especially in the economic era we're just coming out of. And so I think everybody's looking for the appropriate allocation of their resources, and the accountability on the budget issues, I think, is a key to that.
So, Howard, do you have a strategic plan in your organization? And how does the budget process relate to them? Or does it relate?
I'm sorry?
Or does it relate?
It definitely does relate. What we've done in our strategic plan is identify 4 goals and a number of strategies in each goal. So, and in fact, one of our goals is really what I call, or we call, financial sustainability, and that is taking actions that will make our organization more sustainable in the future. So I think that part of it really examines looking at the financial trade-offs in the university more specifically, and being able to understand what the priorities are, and that those priorities need to fit into the plan. On an annual basis, we're looking to make investments in the things that really matter to us. So, for example, we have specific curriculum and program goals since we're an educational institution, and we're looking to redirect dollars, and most of what we're doing now, quite honestly, is really reallocation because of the tightness of budget, of reallocating dollars to key items. So a good example for us in the academic world, as you know, our undergraduate school is a liberal arts college, but increasingly our kind of school is being looked upon to provide more practical experience. So we're, for example, directing resources into the Career Center, which helps people get internships and develop practical aspects of the curriculum. So we're reallocating resources from low priorities to the things we've identified in the plan. So that's kind of the short version of how we link the two together.
Okay, very good. So Jill, do you have, your organization have a strategic plan?
Not a formal one. Ours is more informal and primarily focused on our ministry, not so much the financial part that goes with that. The part where we really link it in is when we prepare our budgets, but it's a fairly informal process for us.
Okay. Linda?
We have a strategic plan with respect to growing our business and expanding beyond the federal marketplace. And we also have an annual plan with respect to growing the contract participants, the federal long-term care insurance program. We're selling the insurance product on behalf of John Hancock, and every year we establish a goal with respect to sales, new sales, and that goal for applications and enrollment growth drives a portion of our budget process. So we have two different kinds of directions. We have the business that we are growing the particular line of business that we're in currently, and we're also trying to grow the client base and expand beyond the federal marketplace.
Thank you. So at Accelerant, we like to say that budgeting is as much a communication process as it is a financial one, in that people are supposed to be communicating how they are going to achieve the next year of the strategic plan. So I think what I'm hearing is in all these cases that you are trying to do your best to make sure that people are budgeting for strategy and not the politics and history. So is budgeting a mission critical? You view budgeting as a mission critical application in your organization, and Linda, since we went with you, we'll start with you this time.
Yes, absolutely, a mission critical operation in our organization. In fact, we're just starting our budget process for the fiscal year 2012. We had a meeting this morning about the communication process, and have started meeting on developing the budgeting plan. It is very important that we start early enough so that we can incorporate getting the approval of our client for our budget, which is very unusual, I think. Most businesses don't have to go to their clients to get the approval on their business, but because the funds that support our operation come from the programs that we administer, our budget is approved by the Office of Personnel Management, and so that time frame has to be taken into consideration. And because we have to get their approval, every expense line in the budget needs to be justified. Not that that's not the case for other businesses as well, but having the government as your kind of budget officer really makes you toe the line.
So, Jill, pardon me saying this, but I think many people who were on the phone would be surprised. I know I was, at how mission-critical budgeting was to the Baptist Church. So, is this a mission-critical application to you folks? Should I be surprised that it is?
It is mission critical for us. Our support for the state convention is all voluntary by our churches. Baptists are kind of a unique denomination in that. So our churches only give to us if they want to, and they count on us to use the monies that they send to us wisely. So it is critical because we do have limited resources. And yet there's unlimited opportunity for ministry and need for ministry. So our organization's pretty large. We have 40 departments. Our budget is almost $40 million. We receive gifts of another about $40 million that we pass on to other entities. So it is significant to our organization, not only the budget process and preparing it, but also mission critical as we go through the year and we have to look at how do we reallocate resources. There's a new ministry that comes up that there's a need to fund, or other ministries that for some reason there's less opportunity for. So our budgeting process is really critical to help us make those decisions throughout the year.
And Howard, I think you probably already said, based on your comments on the new normal, but this is mission critical for you. But do you have anything you want to add there?
Well, I think that the budget, some people say that the budget is really the numerical explanation or manifestation, rather, of the mission of the university. So where we allocate our funds represents what our priorities are, and as what we're trying to do now, and higher education is an industry that's very slow to change, we're trying to realign our budget to our priorities. So I think very much so budgeting is an exercise to help us align the funding to the priorities, and we've historically been fairly incremental in that approach and saying, oh, so much is increasing, and let's take that margin of available funds and put it into some interesting things, and the normal suggests that you have to dive a lot deeper into what you're spending your money on and reallocate funds to what your plan is and what your priorities and mission are.
Thank you. All right. For those of you who are listening in on this webinar, so this is going to be a little self-serving, but just bear with us on that. So obviously, your accelerant clients, you're currently using BudgetPack to do your budgeting, and BudgetPack is much like Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. We realize that. But so what did your users used to complain about in the budget process? And obviously, I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, but what would your users historically have complained about in your old budgeting process? And Jill, let's start with you.
Okay. Our budget users complained about everything in our old process. We used Excel for a time, and they hated that because they're not strong Excel users. It was difficult for them to document or impossible for them to document assumptions. They were constrained by the format. My accounting staff hated it because it was very challenging to roll it up. Then we used an access system, and it was written specifically for us, but it had black holes, and it did a little better job on being able to give some narrative about decisions, but it was very difficult to get the accounting information in. So my users felt like that was too time-consuming and required too much effort to get all the information that was asked for in there. So, and they complain about how much time both of those took. So really pretty much every aspect of it. They complained that they didn't have, I guess one of the other big keys is they complained that they couldn't see and budget their headcount information, and that was a real challenge.
Linda, what did your users historically complain about?
Well, I'd have to mirror Jill's response there. My managers were not very strong with respect to the use of Excel, which is also what we used. There was not an opportunity for them to support the budgets that they prepared in Excel with assumptions that they were using. They also did not have the opportunity to budget for headcount. And it was very frustrating for the finance department as well, because the users sometimes would insert a line or change a formula, which made it very difficult for us to roll up the budget without going through the file line by line to make sure that all the documents were aligned correctly. And it was very frustrating for my controller, who's responsible for consolidating the budget, to put the budget together, and very time-consuming.
Howard?
That's a really good question. I would say that what the users were saying to us were two things. One was they weren't really sure what the decisions made in the budget were. In other words, they had a budget submission, and we weren't really documenting well what the decisions were. So people would say, we would have a conversation, and they would say things like, well, I never agreed to that, or I don't remember that. And I think the second problem was that our budget was really more narrative and very incremental. So to be honest with you, we didn't really have good detail on what was in the budget. So they were saying that they weren't really quite sure what the decisions were and what the details of the budget were. It was not a happy circumstance.
So many people, we hear this a lot. We hear a lot that people are tired of hearing somebody say, sometime over the course of the year, that's not my number. And that could mean two things. That could mean, one, they're surprised by a number that they see once they get to the actual versus budget reporting process, or that they didn't agree with a number. So if they're saying, I know it's there, it's just not my number. So Larry, let's run two polls back to back. Let's find out first from the audience members, what do your line managers complain about most? We're giving you 5 choices, and they may not be the best 5 choices, but let me ask. Let's try this.
Okay, so we've just launched that poll. So one of the points Ted mentioned, the communication in the budget process, that seems to have gotten the most number of votes, along with just the fact the whole process is cumbersome.
So let's ask a follow-up question here, Larry. Let's ask them what they use for budgeting today, and be curious as to see that. And while Larry's doing this, so we're giving you 5 choices. Many of you use Excel. Some of your GL, general ledger systems, or ERP systems have budgeting add-ons. Sometimes you will have a management reporting system, slicing and dicing management reporting system that has some budgeting add-ons. You could be using a standalone budgeting-specific application, or you can still be doing things manually or on paper, or not doing it all. And if you don't do a budget at all right now, you can put just manual as your answer. So go ahead and submit. Excel's the winner, or the GL add-on is the second one as well. So for you panelists on the phone, you all used Excel for budgeting at some point prior to your move. I have a couple of related questions around that. So actually, I'll start with Howard. You have someone in your organization who reports to you who actually owns the budget process. What struggles did they have, and how much of your decision to change that process was driven by your own staff saying enough is enough?
Well, I think that our budget person was very frustrated with sort of inconsistent submissions and large notebooks and a lot of paper process. So I think there was a lot of frustration of not having a consistent set of inputs, and some people followed the directions and some people didn't. We didn't necessarily have tightly linked Excel spreadsheets. We didn't really have a good template, so we had a much looser process, and we had people who would follow the directions and some people didn't. So it almost became to the point where the input we're getting was not usable and had to have a lot of follow-up. So a lot of frustration on his part.
All right. And Linda, did you have anyone in your organization who was responsible for this who beat your door down?
Excuse me. Well, my controller actually is responsible for the budget process, and we did use a template, and we would distribute the template to our managers. Year after year, when the templates would come back, they would have been tampered with or changed, so that when she would be consolidating them, she would have to review every file, all the formulas, and make sure that nobody had changed or overridden what she had built into the template. And I would hear the same complaints year after year, and the the time for completion was, several weeks after the budgets of the different managers would be received. And this was a kind of a routine experience that we were going through on a yearly basis during budget time.
And Joe, you went, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to say that, it really took most of her attention to complete the budget process. We're a small, we're a small finance department, and we were smaller. We've grown a lot in the last 5 years, but previous to that, she was responsible for a lot more of the day-to-day operation of the finance department as well as the budget. So it was a pretty big intrusion into our normal business processes for finance.
And Jill, you went from Excel to a homegrown system before you moved to Accelerant. So it sounds like you had a struggle with Excel and you tried to build something yourself or have a contractor come in, and that didn't work out for you either. So tell me a little bit about that.
We did. I think we faced all the same challenges or similar challenges to Howard and Linda, that that in Excel the templates changed, not able to get all the information documented that we want. The homegrown system was actually the brainchild of a non-financial person, and really was structured much to their liking. There wasn't a lot of input from anybody, including the finance staff on that one. And so that brought a whole new set of problems, in that we still had the same difficulty in getting the financial information at the end in a usable format. But we still had trouble getting head count information prepared. And it just had black holes. No matter how good you are at programming, if it's a one-off homegrown system, there always seem to be problems. So the black holes just kind of were really frustrating, because people would put in their information and it would just disappear somewhere. So that was really a challenge. So, from the accounting staff's point of view, there really were two big keys in looking at what we really wanted, and one of those was just, how do we know where we are in the process? When we were in both of those previous systems, we really had no way to tell if people were finished or if they weren't finished. And then the final thing that was a problem in those old systems was getting the information that the users had prepared and getting it into our financial system, so that we could use it we use our financial system for our monthly reporting, and that was just an incredible ordeal. And of course, senior management always wants it like right now, so you're under a time compression problem as well.
So a lot of people worry that their financial people are becoming programmers, and actually the database administrators, because they're managing all these spreadsheets. Did you folks have that fear that your financial people were turning into your systems people? And, Linda?
My controller is a very technologically oriented person to begin with, and so yeah, she was. She has been always the go-to person for report development, and of course that takes a lot of time, and developing the templates and modifying them to support the growth of the organization took a lot of time as well. So I would have to say yes, that was very concerning.
All right, so I'm going to move on here. So you folks all were worried about a culture of budget accountability for your users. So did you involve your users in the decision to change systems? Howard, did you bring your users in?
We did. We have about roughly 25 people who we call budget managers that have responsibility for a portion of our budget, and we very much involve them in looking at a new system. We felt that if the system really wasn't something they wanted and they really bought into, it really wasn't going to be very helpful. So they were involved every step of the way in terms of looking at the system.
Jill?
We didn't so much involve our users, but we involved a fairly broad group from our financial department and also from our IT department. And by doing that, we kind of got the representation of our users because they both support the users and understood a lot of the technology constraints that our users have. As I mentioned earlier, our department managers mostly are not very strong technologically and certainly not in Excel.
Linda, did you involve your users in the decision process?
I involved my controller. Diane is very astute with respect to technology, as I had said, and I actually stumbled on Budget Pack accidentally at a conference that I was attending, and it was quite timely because we were in the midst of our budget process, and so I had been listening to Diane complain about the process of consolidating the templates. When I saw the demonstration that Larry was doing at the conference, I immediately recognized that it would be a valuable tool for us, and had Diane look at it online, and Larry did a demonstration almost immediately after I returned from the conference. As far as the managers were concerned, I didn't involve them at all, no.
Okay, so let's go down that line of questioning, and let's try not to use Budget Pack necessarily as the example. So how would you advise the people on the phone to choose a system that would meet the needs of their users and get to a culture of budget accountability? And I might be asking the question, why did you choose Budget Pack? But I'd prefer if we didn't answer it that way. I'm sorry, and Linda, since we were on, can you take that one?
I didn't really intend to change from Excel. I wasn't looking for a system to replace Excel. I wasn't really aware that there were options out there when I saw Budget Pack. So I can only speak from that experience. I didn't look at anything else because when I saw the demonstration, I recognized that in its simplicity and ease of use, it would satisfy both the issues that our managers had with Excel and the issues that Diane was having with respect to consolidating and managing the budget process. So I can't really speak to, giving managers an opportunity to see if it would be useful for the ease of use for them. I made that judgment based on my observation of the software.
Okay. And Jill, how did you do that?
After the last round in our Access homegrown system, we really looked at the weaknesses that we had there, which were it was difficult for our users, for our department managers to use. They didn't have headcount transparency, and they couldn't own the whole process from start to finish, which was a huge accountability issue for us. As I think someone mentioned earlier, if anybody else touches it along the way, sometimes those department managers think that nothing is what they did. So those were really three guiding principles for us. We looked at, like 6, 7 different systems, and all of them looked like Excel, which for us was really a bad choice because of our user weakness in Excel. And then my IT manager found Budget Pack, and when we looked at that, it seemed to hit all of those weaknesses that we had identified, including our ability to easily get the information from that software into our financial software. So we really looked at what I figured everybody does the baseline stuff, so how do they address the weaknesses that we were identifying, and that was really our focus.
And how would you advise people to help increase, what would you use as a criteria for picking how to increase the culture of accountability for users, for the audience?
I would say that, echoing what was said before in terms of ownership of the various departments that are responsible for budgets, it has to be something that's user-friendly. In other words, it needs to be something they could work with, where they could accurately document their budget request, and then something that has some kind of workflow, so that as at least in our world, budgets might be developed by the department that then might have to go to a vice president or other area to be approved, and then something that could be locked down, so to speak. So it has to relate to the budget process. In other words, you have a budget request, you have a budget approval, and also in our world, we have different phases. In other words, we have a preliminary budget that we present that in midwinter. We're in the July 1 fiscal year, so we want to lock that down, and then we're also looking for something where we could then have a final budget, which is what we do in May, and then maybe even a revised budget based on once we see what our enrollment is for the fall. We may sometimes we have to make some additional changes. So I think it has to be it has to follow the budget process and be something that's easy to use from the user perspective.
Okay, thank you. So we're running out of time here. I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. I'm going to ask three simultaneously, and then you guys can see how you weave these together. And the three questions is, so what's different today before, and the follow-up on that is, what benefits do you think were derived by either finance or your users or the organization as a whole? And I'm also going to ask simultaneously the question, if you had it to do all over again, is there anything you would have done differently? And Jill, I'll start with you this time. I sort of asked three questions, so you can pick and choose which one of them you want to answer, or if you want to answer them all.
I think the thing that's different today is my users like the process. They feel like they have full visibility and full control of the process. The one thing I would do differently is I would have done this much sooner. I think we went through a lot of agony along the way that we could have prevented had we just gotten a dedicated budget system earlier.
Okay, Linda?
Well, I would have to agree. Our managers here are much more satisfied with the budget process. They love the ease of use of BudgetPack and the way it walks you through the budget process line by line in a kind of conversational way. We also use BudgetPack. We import the month-to-month results, actual results, into BudgetPack so that we can offer to our users the ability to go in and see where they are at any point in time, budget to actual. I'm very happy with the results. I have one person who's not particularly technologically oriented who put it, I think, in a nice way. She said, well, if I can figure out how to use this, anyone can. And she was the first person to get her budget completed the year that we converted to BudgetPack. The process is much smoother now, and the accessibility of the system to the users, I think, on a year-round basis, I think is something that they really like as well.
Before I move to Howard, I just want to point out that happy, like, satisfied, and love are not words that normally are in the same sentence as budgeting. So, Howard, you want to take a shot at those three questions?
Well, I think first question, what's different today? I think we have two things. One is that we have a user community that was able to document the details of their budget and budget requests. So I think that they're satisfied. I'm satisfied from the finance perspective because I have a lot more confidence in the budget, particularly on the salary side. We used to had a methodology where we'd use some payroll information in the aggregate to create budgets, but there was no detailed line-by-line roll-ups feeding into the budget, which I'm used to. So I think what's different now is that we have a budget. It's in a system. We're now at the preliminary budget phase, heading toward the budget phase, and it's all tied down. It's well documented. I have 99.9% level of confidence in the numbers. I think the benefit is twofold. One is psychological, that we have a budget and we're going to increase our probability of staying within the budget because it's well documented and well done. And two is that we're I think, going to preserve our resources as best we can. So I think overall, I think we're a lot tighter and people are happy with the process. In terms of doing it all over again, I would say I'm sure there's a couple of things that we could come up with that will be in the continuous improvement as we move forward. But, from a high level, we're very gratified by what happened. I think we could have done a better job. We have about a 90% compliance. About 10% of the departments didn't want to use the product, and I'm not sure why, and I think we could have done a better job working with them. So I think we're going to be going into year 3, and that's going to be a top priority is working with those handful of departments that just didn't want to use the product, were afraid to, or whatever. We really should get to 100% compliance.
Okay, Larry, do we have any questions from the audience members? Has anyone submitted anything?
Yeah, we have a couple. One is, does it resolve the headcount budgeting issues that managers were facing?
I think Howard just answered that one. Howard, do you have anything to add to that?
What was the question, Larry? I'm sorry.
Does it resolve the headcount budgeting issues that managers were facing?
Oh, yeah, very much so. And, even with the 500-person organization, you think that's relatively small, but we went through numerous cleanup scenarios to make sure we got it right. So I think we in central finance and the departments, I think, are ecstatic that we understand what the headcount is and who's going where and who's budgeted where.
Linda, does it deal with your headcount issues?
Yes, it allows our budget managers to actually budget their headcounts, which in the past, all of that resided in with the HR director. She compiled a master sheet, based on input from department managers, but now it's part of the individual budget manager's budgeting process, and she has, reviews at the end and discusses any additions with the budget managers, but they themselves identify their needs.
Can't tell you how many times we hear that in the budget process from organizations looking to change the process, but they don't do salary planning down to the people level that's done by HR, yet 70% of the expenses of the organization are people. So it just amazes me. So, Jill, were your personnel issues dealt with?
Oh, definitely. I have one department in particular has 80 or 100 employees in it. Some are part-time, some are full-time, some are seasonal, and so it gives them the ability to see every single person and to budget when people are coming and going, if there's additions or they know somebody's leaving to go back to school. It also gave us the capability to much more finely budget our benefits. We can set those percentages across the board. We have some kind of wacky nuances there as a church organization, and so not only has it made it much more transparent for my departments, they can see everything in their department. It also gave us a lot of flexibility and capability on the benefit side of things as well.
Sorry, any other pressing questions that we should for the panelists that came in? Or?
Well, we do have a couple more. I don't know if any of them are pressing, but one that I found intriguing was, did you meet any resistance to change, and how did you deal with it?
Howard, you want to take that?
Well, I think from our perspective, what we've done so far has been fairly easy to implement because it was a win-win. In other words, we had the goals of central finance and the departments were aligned. We're moving into a much deeper exercise where we're going to be examining our spend in great detail and, as I mentioned before, making sure it aligns with our mission and looking at trade-offs. I anticipate a lot of resistance to that. So, for example, one area that we're starting to look at is how we allocate faculty resources in various departments, and we're already getting pushback of saying, oh, we're at the bare bones, we can't reallocate anything, and my belief is that there are actually a lot of inefficiencies in the way we operate. So we've just done the easy part. The harder part of budget strategy is yet to come, and I anticipate huge amounts of pushbacks. Huge amounts of pushback.
Jill, any resistance?
Yeah, we've been through two major conversions, our financial software and then also customer management system, and I would say almost 100% of our staff hated both of those. And when we went to Budget Pack, I didn't get any of that. They liked it. It was so much easier than what we had done before that I got essentially 100% acceptance, and actually got emails from my budget managers thanking me for the software, which had certainly never happened with any other conversion that we had done. So I was extremely pleased with that.
Okay, and as I recall, Linda, you said you're the boss and you were going to just, you weren't putting up with any resistance. Is that right? Recall that correctly?
Well, we didn't really, I didn't get any resistance to the change to Budget Pack. People like the system. I think if there was any resistance to the changes, it came from the HR director with respect to the change in how we budget headcount now, because she doesn't, I mean, she previously kind of held the reins with that, and now people do their own individual department budgeting for headcount, and she acts as a reviewer, and you know, she and I go over the final proposed headcount, but she doesn't. She's not responsible for preparing that budget anymore.
All right. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for participating today, the panelists and the audience members as well. Larry, I'm hoping I can do the, we missed a poll. I'm hoping you can put the last one in. But do you want to handle the wrap-up for us? And that's because we promised these people we would let them go at 3 o'clock. So you want to handle that?
The last poll we have is just your feedback on the on this event today. So we'll let that run, and as we do that, we'll sort of tell you a little bit about how we might follow up here, or some next steps. We are going to be making a recorded version of this webinar available to you, and you'll be able to share it with others in your organization. We would certainly encourage you to visit our website, sign up for a blog. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on that. We also have case studies from the folks that you've heard from today. Those are available on our website, as well as some of our other clients. And of course, we would encourage you to give us a call directly. We'll have that up on the screen in a minute for a consultation. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on is our ability and the experience that we've had actually running budget processes for companies like Pepsi and Reader's Digest, and we're definitely open to sharing some of that experience and maybe walking through some issues with you. So those would all be ways that we would encourage you to follow up from here. So with that, we will close the poll and say thank you to all of our panelists for the very generous use of their time. Howard, Jill, Linda, thank you very much. And we certainly look forward to following up with some of the folks from the webinar today. Bye for now.